Guys, welcome to another podcast, Wisdom Podcast. I guess we can call it that one. We have another wonderful podcast host today. His name is Daniel Topor. He leads a podcast, which I found quite interesting as a title, the Dancing with Doubt podcast. And yeah, we're going to talk about doubts today. We're going to talk about imposter syndrome, which is a topic that I thought I didn't have imposter syndrome until some time ago. I found myself quite uncomfortable interviewing top guests on my pod. Daniel will tell you a nice story about that one as well. And I was like, dude, why am I like so nervous? Dude, why? It's been like 3 years since I haven't felt that. And I reflected back and I thought it was imposter syndrome. So we're going to talk about that today. Dan, introduce yourself. Tell us about the podcast, yourself, and your life.
Hey Charles, thanks very much for having me on. I must admit, this is actually the first time I'm being interviewed back as a podcast host. Normally, I'm in your position, but yeah, it's great to be here, and thanks for the opportunity. Really pleased to be catching up. So look, I'm a relative newborn in the game of podcasting. I started my pod in August last year, but actually only launched the first episode in February. So still fairly new to the game, but have grown to thousands of listeners thus far, and I think I have a few tricks I can definitely share. And yeah, looking forward to getting into it with you.
Well, first
So
tell us about the doubt that crept into you with that guess that you had that power woman on the pod. That's quite an entertaining one. Let's start with that.
yeah, sure. So on my fifth episode, I met with a lady called Victoria Pelletier. So Victoria is an absolute superstar businesswoman from the States. She's currently managing director of Accenture in the US, and has had really prominent positions in the corporate world. She's also a pretty prominent public speaker and an advocate for various social issues. So, quite admittedly, I was very nervous before the interview. And even though I did quite a bit of prep and read up on her profile and we did a pre-call, the day of the recording, I was absolutely just shitting myself. Pardon my French. Don't know if I can swear on your podcast, but here we
Yeah.
are. So basically, my mindset was all over the place. I was nervous, I was sweating, I was pacing, and really, it was because Victoria's stature was so high, and I just felt like mine was so diminished compared to her. And that's weird because she's actually the one that reached out to me and wanted to be on my podcast. So logically, I shouldn't have been nervous, but on the day, there was just nothing I could do. And no matter how good you can prep in these sort of situations, unfortunately, that's just the way it is. So the way that I dealt with it was really just meet it head on. And as the pod progressed, I got more and more comfortable. And it is important for your guests to also be nice and warm and also sort of, inviting and able to answer your questions well. But yeah, definitely wasn't my finest bit of work. Even looking back, I didn't even want to put it up. But as I got feedback from others and I reflected and adopted the mindset of, yeah, it's not my best work, but at least I've actually learned something and at least I've given someone some value. I've come and made peace with it. And yeah, I've had really good feedback since.
Right. I had the same with David Allen, GTD founder. He was kind of my idol because I read his books and applied his methods for quite a while. So that was quite incredible, but so nerve-wracking because I felt some resistance throughout the call. And I wish I would be better at facing resistance, because it's part of life and it's part of humans as well. I'm resistant myself. Sometimes, like for example, when I get on interviews and I see that the candidate is late and he's starting his career and making some bold claims, well, I show some resistance, and it's like kind of a dad showing his kid the way. And that was exactly what David was trying to do with me, like show show a younger guy. I mean, he's almost 80 years old, so he had the whole career in front of him, hugely successful career, like top
Mm.
CEOs want to be next to him and so forth. So I guess that's what he wanted to show in me. And did I pass the test, the question? And then, yeah, the time after I was like, damn, should I publish that? I made such a kind of shame of myself, and I had negative comments on my YouTube, people commenting about my interviewing style, which is quite uncommon, unorthodox. I decided to publish it, so I can get more of that feedback in the end. Because every time you resist feedback and the ego is telling you like, look, don't listen to that guy. Well, there's a part of the truth, right? If you're resisting it, because sometimes the actual reaction of the ego is like, this is just ridiculous, and you just laugh, because this is just some crazy person out there. But when you're like almost offended and you feel the rage and the fight, it's not even flight in my case, just like fight. You need to ponder on that, and I found a lot of lessons just from publishing that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so important to have that feedback loop, because the worst thing that you can get into is thinking that you're amazing and you've learnt everything and there's nothing further to gain from it. And then you create that loop in your head and then you can't actually learn and progress. And the fact that you felt rage or that you felt such a strong emotion afterwards does show that you care. And if you care, then that's half the game. Caring is so important because that actually allows you to take on that feedback, learn and progress and get better. And that's sort of, similar to you, I'm also being coached. And you can't do it by yourself. You do need that external feedback, and you do need someone external to come in sometimes and look at it and tell it for what it is.
Right. And someone you trust, I guess, because not all people have good intentions, but even their feedback can be good. I also think empathy is a great part of the game. Empathy is really hard, especially when you compete in, this testosterone world. Like, I'm certainly full of it myself. Testosterone, not shit. Although you could argue both. But yeah, I think when you receive that feedback and from a human and you immediately fight, I think just a bit more empathy and understand that humans are complex creatures, and some people, sometimes they can't understand why people are that evil or mean. Well, you don't need to look up far, just look at your own actions. All humans actually get angry sometimes, and I think just understanding that full picture really, really helps. And in the case of YouTube haters and Twitters and trolls, I haven't dealt with that recently, but it was actually a sign of success. I think when you start getting people criticize your work, you're on track. And so what if others get like more success? Maybe yes, I need to improve my style. But last but not least, I also think people should go their own little weird path, and not necessarily follow what's often best practices out there. Follow their passion, follow their heart, because you don't. I mean, Tim Ferriss is part of my podcast advisory circle, but I don't want to be the next Tim Ferriss or Elon Musk, although there's a strong percentage of that in me. I think like the world is better when it's diverse and there's like diverse opinions, diverse ideas and strategies out there. What do you think?
Well, the reality is, Charles, the world already has a Tim Ferriss and it already has an Elon Musk. So you don't need to be another one of those people. The world already has these. You have to be Charles Cormier. I have to be Daniel Topor. And we all have a unique perspective to bring to the world and unique messages that hopefully can help some people. For me personally, with my podcast, I don't really like, my objective is not to help millions of people. If it gets that big, fantastic. But if I can just help change the opinion of 10 people, make the world a better place for 10 people, I've done my job, because it's really, really closely aligned to my why. But you touched on YouTube haters and bad feedback before. I think that's always going to be there if you stick your head out and try something new and try something different. The reality is that's just the world we live in. And if you do stick your head out, then people are going to take pot shots at you. But I always ask myself, when I get that sort of negative feedback, what is that person actually doing? How are they contributing positively to the world? And chances are they're not. So I don't really care about their opinion. I'll take their feedback on board if it's constructive, but if it's just rubbish, then just cast it away.
Right. Pieces of data is how it would qualify, because well, if we use the golden rule, which I tend to use in some cases, well, I don't comment too much shit on others' posts. I have sometimes the urge to do so, but I think I refrain myself for the simple reason that there's too much of a shit vs good ratio on a lot of these platforms. LinkedIn, you don't get a lot of that, but Twitter and and YouTube is definitely full of it, full of trolls. That it's like too easy. The incentive, right, is like us humans were wired for competition. How can I compete behind my screen? By just putting others down. That will make me feel better, and that will put the other down at the same time. So it's kind of a no-brainer. Plus, I've got zero repercussions, I'm not taken accountable by anyone to do so. So my next question is, if you want to help someone, how do you actually give them good feedback? Because, for example, my employees, I tend to be harsh with them, but they trust me, they know I'm a good guy. I know that they're good persons too. And I know I can be harsh in that case. And I've seen the result of being that much. Doesn't mean to be a total asshole, but it means that I can be straight to the point and avoid all the flattery and the blah blah, because I know them also, they know me too. So I guess kind of reciprocal relationship. But how do you give feedback to a stranger? Let's say that I listened to one Dan podcast. um how should I give you feedback about things? Should it be in private, in public? What do you suggest?
Look, to be honest, I think whatever you're comfortable with is the short answer. I've got private feedback. I've got probably less so public feedback. I think personally, in order to build trust with people, I think it's really important to share vulnerability and do that up front. For example, with some of my previous pods, especially early on, I was quite nervous before recording, and I actually said that on the pod recording itself up front. Hey, I'm actually really nervous about this. And it really actually, I found, disarms people, and it disarms your own walls. So it brings down your walls. It's something you can both have a laugh about and then actually move on. So I make it my power rather than something that takes me back.
Right.
I know it's hard to do, especially, you've mentioned masculine dominated upbringing. I've got something similar. I'm from Russia. So, enough said there. So it's been a skill that I've had to learn and consciously apply. But things like showing your vulnerability, even adopting self-depreciating humor can be really, really powerful tools to form that connection with someone. And especially with a troll, you can actually have some fun with it, because if you start throwing it out there back to them, they kind of go, oh, okay, how do I even deal with this? Do I have another go at him? And chances are the negative feedback tends to go away.
Yeah. The fun part, is just that they have more time in your hands, being the lesser degree of success. But yeah, I'm gonna keep A/B testing, experimenting. There's also PR in the mix and so forth. Although I'm not a PR fan, sometimes you do need PR to win some hard games. For example, legal. You need to not be your true self in those situations if it's gonna impact you. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. But in most situations, you can be your authentic self and so forth. Yeah, you touch on many interesting points there. I really like the advice you just gave, which is kind of judokaiing whatever's happening in your mind, using this dark shit and converting into like really positive stuff. Um, us humans, we're very much social creatures, right? And when we're not social, we tend to self-sabotage. It's really like an interesting self mechanism, right? If we're like in our own heads, it's the same when people have bad trips, when they're doing mush or LSD, it's that they're too much in their own heads. And then there's this mechanism, this human mechanism that is like, oh yeah, I'm uncomfortable, I'm weird, that I'm like secluded, I'm just like not accepted, right? Good part of bad trips, weirdly enough, is like social non-acceptance. uh we're just fascinating creatures as humans. Like, do you often think about these deep questions and psychology, and how does that help you lead great interviews with your podcast guests?
Oh, 100%. And I'm actually so glad you went there, Charles, because this is an area that I do like I have explored from time to time. I've been in South America and I've done shamanic retreats. I've spent weeks and weeks in the Amazon, working with ayahuasca, San Pedro, many other plant medicines. And I think we humans, especially guys, tend to be in our head a lot of the time. And the head can actually deviate us from our true path, because the head is designed to protect us and it thinks it knows everything. But if you can learn to connect with your heart and listen to your heart and your gut, that is really, really powerful stuff that I've learned. For example, when you first reached out to me to catch up here, the first question I asked you was, what is your why? Why are you actually reaching out to me? Like, what's your deeper reason? And you gave me a really good answer. You gave me an answer on an intellectual level. I want to learn more about this and this. And then you gave me an answer at a deeper level. I'll let you expand on that if you want. But that was, to me, that was like, okay, this is someone that genuinely wants to learn and connect and progress and grow. So your head was aligned with your heart. And here we are having this beautiful chat. So for me, it's always about trying to get out of here and override what's up here, because this can lead you astray. This doesn't always have the answers, but this is what you should be going off. And if you have a really good feeling about someone, especially a guest or a topic, and even if it's a little bit edgy or on the side, we're talking about plant medicines, it's not legal in a lot of the Western worlds. That's okay, because it's important information to get out there.
Right. Yeah, I didn't remember that email. I get so many per day, but yeah, the why to my podcast, conversing is a passion of mine. It is. Since I was young, I can remember my drunk self in parties just hitting up conversations with complete strangers and making friends in 15 minutes. That's for sure. Then I wrote get insights myself. So yeah, it's kind of selfish and I don't avoid that. I think all of us humans we need to put our own oxygen mask first. Get insights to my team and my audience. Yeah, sure. Um, Visibility, practice skills of mine. And then I said, start a podcasting service, which is actually something I'm on track of. It's also interesting to see time, to evaluate time, because that's been like 2 weeks. I'm getting more and more on track to start this podcasting. So yeah, really happy with that. Podcasting is like this gift, it's like this second nature thing that I've been doing most of my life. First in these parties, second in the sales profession, and now podcast, really like natural progression. And yeah, really glad that you came in. Podcast about podcasting. That can be weird to hear in an email. That unfortunately came here. I just have a last couple of questions for you. What other insights did you get from these trips? Because me, I've done it also in Peru. I've done it. I do it like every year because I think it really unlocks physical doors, like physically the biochemical reaction, and also mental wise. I view these events as they're not supposed to be super nice, Like I even think that the bad trip is part of it, just like it's part of life. Like there's no days that you go without the wave thing, the positive, the negatives, and getting through these things. I really get some mental grit and resilience from it. And I recently found out that on mushrooms, I could get in really deep meditative states, which will push me probably to go in Oaxaca. There's a place near here called San Jose del Pacifico. I'll go there and probably have a nice psilocybin trip. And also before my wedding, I know a guy that does that in Oaxaca that I had on my pod. Amazing guy.
Yep.
But that's the next step to me. Like, and the last insight was deep meditation and solo, right? Because I usually do these trips in group. So what insights have you got on your end?
Oh, look, Charles, I mean, we can spend hours talking about this, so I think I'll have to just be really, really brief and just summarize it really briefly. In my eyes, there's two sides to it. There's the learning side and there's the healing side. So when we talk about the healing side, a lot of the time we are the way we are because of our past experiences, and a lot of the traumatic events that happen tend to bury themselves in our subconscious. So we don't actually know why we react to someone when they've annoyed us, for example, or we get upset when a certain situation happens. So for me, I wouldn't say that I had a traumatic childhood. I had a very good childhood, but there were things that happened that buried themselves in my subconscious that I never dealt with, and I didn't even think were an issue and didn't think were holding me back. So that's something that really, that the plant medicines, they're smarter than you. They can bury into your subconscious and they can dig out whatever needs to be dug out. You face it head on and you deal with it and you cast it away. And that is total liberation. So that's the healing side in a very, very broad nutshell. On the learning side, I find that basically the insights that I've been given is you're not the same person that you were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. That person is gone. They don't exist anymore. So as a human, it's important to learn and grow and give yourself the permission to evolve. So, I don't consider myself, like I said, the same person as a year ago. I'm completely different now. and it's okay. And I accept that new side to me, and I've given myself the permission to move on. So the learning and healing is always an interesting one. I'm sure there's a lot more that I could talk about, but yeah, in a nutshell, that's been my experience.
Yeah, right. 7 minutes left, so let's make best use of that time. And on my side, it's funny because yesterday I was reflecting about these things, but a good one that we talked about today is why do I feel this surge of cortisol when I have someone resisting me? Why do I need to have this control? Why can't I invite adversity? Like what's so bad about adversity? Why does it spike my cortisol? And yesterday, funnily enough, I don't know why I'm reflecting on that, but a girl actually broke a bottle of beer on my head when I was 18 or something. And I was somehow, I thought, it's funny. I've had various various psychotherapists, but I never reflected on that, right? The fact to have your consciousness taken in a second by someone that is ambushing you, and
Mhm.
what's the effect of that on trust? I don't have trust issues nowadays, but just these micro traumas. um I think that one needs to uncover them, and like you said, as men, we tend to just put it all inside. And me in these trips, what I felt more than anything else was Mother Nature taking care of me. Right now my dogs are having little doggies, and I'm seeing how the mom like takes care of them and is always there for them. And I think as men, we need to kind of surrender sometimes to this greater force, and the healing power of these ritual is quite deep. Now obviously you can get into some traps and into this and think they will fix your own life. It's not really like this, and it can be a bit more micro than macro. And talking about that, you said that you're a completely different person. A team that I love to talk about is, what percentage of you are you still yourself? Because me, I'm still, there's still somewhat the bold Charles of before. He's ambitious, he wants to accomplish a lot. Obviously he was mostly dumb, and I've changed a lot of my philosophies. But I'm still at least 25-ish% my younger self, but I do understand that a good part of my inner atoms, they do change quite a lot. So are you still the Daniel that you were when you were young, or is that like mostly gone? Because you use the word completely, which would mean 100% in my head.
Yeah, look, it's very, very deep philosophical questions you're asking, Charles. I think it's hard to answer in numbers terms. I think that little boy that still relishes adventure, that still relishes trying new things and getting himself into challenging situations. Like I'll never stick to five-star hotels. I always go into the local areas and have the local food when I travel and rub shoulders with the local, even if it's a dangerous area. So I think that part of me is still there. But what I have found, and what I would recommend to anyone that is looking to starting a pod, particularly when you're interviewing guests, is have a look at yourself introspectively and see if you've actually got a mask on and if you've created a mask. So for me, because I work in corporate and I've been in corporate, I do a lot of presentations, I do a lot of public speaking, and historically, I developed this persona, this tough guy persona that didn't show emotion, didn't show vulnerability, and it was actually holding me back. It wasn't the true me. Well, maybe it was the true me for that period of time. But now that I look back on it introspectively, I'm like, who is that guy? Who is that asshole? And once I was coached and I was able to realize that and go, that's actually not me now. I've cast that person away. My relationships have actually gotten way better. I'm way better in business. I'm way better in presentations. I'm having this conversation openly with you, which I would never have done. That was all a mask, and that mask is gone. So that's linked back to your vulnerability and your sense of self. But if you can actually lose that mask, you will be a much better person and you will naturally evolve. And you won't look back and go, oh, I wish I was still that person, because you'll love who you are. And I think it sounds like for you, you're undertaking a similar journey. You've got this, maybe I wouldn't call it conflict, but maybe you're still trying to figure out, okay, who am I now versus who am I used to be, and where does that leave me at the moment? Is that a fair assumption that you're just trying to feel your way through it at the moment?
No, I think, well, partly, like there's always a part, but I'm still a part of the younger Charles. To me, it's more like, well, I don't think the ambition will go away. I do think it's also aligned with my vision and mission to help the world, to say it in a very cliche way. But for what you mentioned, though, like, yes, there's somewhat of a truth in there. When I started in sales doing 200 phone calls a day, that's not natural, like, especially for a young
Definitely
guy,
not.
and you have to put some face. Um, Now, I think that was somewhat aligned with my true self, that ambitious person. But it's hard for me to think about that because I was almost an entrepreneur from day one. I've somewhat stayed true to my values, but what I can tell you is that in the last years, there's been like marketing gurus and sales gurus and all that. I was somewhat influenced by that, and I think that the ethics lines have somewhat been blurred, and I didn't like that about myself and I'm business. So I'm in somewhat of a journey and almost end of the journey in transitioning to full honesty and transparency and full self-alignment. And I have seen what you mentioned in the corporate world quite a lot, in which people could put this corporate bullshit mask, which is like, yeah, like they're like robots reading scripts. I
Mm.
sometimes get to talk to these folks, and am I shocked, or am I trying to like dent a hole in their mask or something? Really playful when it comes to this, and it's like, dude, why are you pitching me? Like, you can be yourself. We can be two humans, two buddies talking like in front of a beer.
Just be
um
two humans. That's it, man.
like, why, like, and sales, if we keep it to its essence, sales is just pure trust. Do you feel my energy, one? And two, am I making a good job at just telling you straight up what the product will be, and giving estimates to my projections, 80% that happening. And sometimes I ask like quite precise questions, which is what I love and what I get hate for on this podcast. But yeah, I think you've done a good job at answering most of them, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. And look, I think if, probably one of the closing statements is if you understand your why and why you're on this earth, then you can align the how. A lot of people try and do the how first and then they get lost. And this is something that I did for most of my life. I was trying to figure out how do I get somewhere, but where am I actually going and why am I going there? They're the more important questions. You get that right in your head and your heart, and the how will come. And yeah, it's linked back to vulnerability. It's linked back to the mask. It's linked back to a lot of things that we were saying today. The why is the most important question.
Love it, dude. Where can people find out more about your pod, by the way?
Yeah, so you can find me on basically all major streaming platforms. So Google Podcasts, Apple, Spotify. I've got a YouTube channel as well. Or you can catch me at dancingwithdoubts.com. If you are listening, yeah, give us a follow on Insta and LinkedIn. Pretty active on those platforms. And yeah, I'm sure you'll be posting this one up on what, YouTube? Is that where these things go up?
As a main channel, man. Yeah, YouTube Shorts
Yeah,
are
nice.
pretty cool, and YouTube's where I get my content. So yeah, but working on publishing multi-platform with Anchor and tools like that. But yeah, I guess people will find us out.
Beautiful.